All right, so we'll get started. Brad, Brian, thanks for joining us. I don't know how much you guys know about me. My name's Christian. I've been brewing for about a year and a half. I'm the secretary slash social chair for ZZ Hops, and we've been thinking about doing something like this for a little while. We're just trying to get the club active in these kind of crazy times. So for anybody who doesn't know you guys, maybe Brad, if you could start, could you introduce who you are, what you do, how long you've been doing it, and then Brian will jump over to you.
Sure. I think I know almost everybody I see on here. This is my first time using Zoom, so if I do something dumb, just let me know.
Hey, look at that. Yeah,
Um,
I'm discovering a lot too.
so I opened Grains and Taps 7 years ago with Brian Bixby in downtown Lee Summit. So we started out as a homebrew supply store and craft beer tap room. Um, added 2 years ago, we added a brewery, became a professional brewery. So I think a lot of you have been in before, so I'm not going to go into all of it. Um, but but yeah, that's me. I'm Lee Summit resident. Uh, Prior to this, I was working as a mechanical engineer, and I'll leave it at that.
Thanks. Brian, you want to jump in? Talk a little bit about you and what you do?
Yeah, my name is Brian Freymuller. I am currently the lead brewer at Grains and Taps. Been with Grains and Taps for I think 6 years now. I think it's coming on that. I'd have to look back. But started out working with them part time behind the bar at our original location on Douglas Street. Was serving beers on draft there. That kind of developed into a little bit more of a full-time role. Got into helping out with like managing and working in the homebrew shop. That transitioned over to our new location, and then obviously the homebrew shop split off of that and is at the new location a little bit further down Third Street. So now kind of bouncing back and forth between the two places, kind of helping out a little bit everywhere. Um, I started out originally home brewing. Started out as a customer of Grains and Taps and a member of ZZ Hops as well. So really been lucky to kind of get into the position I am right now. Very fortunate to kind of have this opportunity to turn the hobby that I loved into, something that I can do for a living. So love doing it. Very grateful for it. So
Cool. Thanks for kind of giving that background, guys. To kind of kick us off, and I don't know if you guys want to tag team on this. Some of this might divert towards Brad, some of it might divert towards you, Brian. But if you guys, I'll let you guys kind of navigate that water. This first one's probably more of a Brad question. So Brad, like, could you talk about how you guys? I know you said that you started as the homebrew shop. Like, how that became something for you to get started up. What was your inspiration behind kicking that off? And then, how has maybe that inspiration changed over time to what you guys do now?
So I started brewing with a group of about 8 of my coworkers. I worked at Black and Veatch in Overland Park, and we had one guy in the office, and he was a home brewer. And he eventually, I painted that myself, Kevin. Um, my coworker eventually got all of us to come over and participate in a couple brew days. We all immediately fell in love. I mean, if it wasn't just making the beer at first, we also drank a whole lot of beer those first 2 times. So it was very easy to get eased into the hobby. As I was going along with it, I realized in Lee Summit, there really wasn't any easy way to get homebrew supplies if you were trying to go in person to a shop. There was, you were driving about 45 minutes each way to get supplies. So me and Bixby kind of set out and said there has to be more people in the area doing this same hobby to where this would make sense. I was driving out to usually Olathe, uh, mainly because I worked in Overland Park, so that was the closest place for me to get. But I was also running into the issue of they were kind of open 9 to 5, so at the end of my workday, I'd rush to get over there, and then I'd have to drive home in rush hour and everything. So I really wanted to give some kind of option in Lee Summit. But on top of that, we didn't want it just to be a retail store. The goal the whole time was it was going to be somewhere that people could come and hang out and kind of bond over, a couple beers or something. So our concept was to open the homebrew supply store with a craft beer bar, kind of in the same location. It wasn't our brews. It was, at the time we opened that, you also didn't have as many craft breweries or really any of the craft breweries that are in Kansas City at this point. So I think the first time we had taps behind our bar, it was, I need to close this chat window because I keep looking at it.
Yeah, they can do that sometimes. They can catch you with all that.
First time we had taps behind our bar, I think it was like Bell's, Odell, Tallgrass, because I think at the time Boulevard and Big Rip were the only two Kansas City breweries, and I'm leaving out 75th Street and McCoy's on those, but those were about the only four Kansas City breweries that were in existence at the time. So we kind of went from there, started rotating taps, bringing different beers and different things to try into our tap room, and kind of went from there.
Cool. And maybe Brian, can you chime in where like you kind of take over and what you guys have kind of done up till now?
So I guess mainly from that original location where we were originally doing, the retail store, and then getting into like the 8 drafts that we had, added on the cooler, put a few more lines into that as well too. So I think we had up to about 11 total drafts, and then we had kind of a double windowed cooler there with like to-go beers and that. From that, we basically moved to the new location on 3rd Street, where we're at right now, 10 Southwest 3rd Street. And now we've got 24 drafts from that original 11. The 25th draft that we have there now, which I think is a really cool thing, that we've kind of been able to kind of partner up with some friends at Boulevard, and they got us on board kind of that original pilot system for the dual draft. It's this new kind of draft mechanism. It's kind of set up. It's kind of hard to explain, but it's got its own little kind of a hose that kind of goes down through the main draft tower. And so you replace the line like every time. It kind of reminds me of like a little Keurig dispenser, but it's just really new, cool technology that we kind of got hooked up on. So that's our 25th draft right now. And so I think we've definitely expanded and been able to provide Lee Summit area a lot of variety in kind of the craft beer market. And that obviously is springboarded into us becoming a brewery now. So we've been able to kind of take what we've learned through over those years and kind of implement those into our brewery and making beers that we love, and trying to replicate kind of the same variety that we had when we originally started.
And I mean, I think everybody in here knows what you guys talk about when you say the original location, but you're talking about, like, for people who are around now, you're talking about the place where Fringe is and off Douglas, right?
Yeah, the place Fringe is at right now. Eddie and Mark in that location there.
Yeah.
And if you hadn't been in there, it's kind of neat to think about at this point. We had both a bar and the entire homebrew supply store in there, so it was incredibly crammed. So that was the reason we ended up moving up the street.
Yeah, and before we dive into maybe some of the heavier hitting questions, you guys used to have that homebrew shop in where the tap room is at your current location, and then if you guys could maybe talk about the transition where now your primary location is just the brewery, and then the homebrew shop is located down the street. Could you talk about what that transition looked like and maybe what propelled that forward?
Yeah, the once we added the brewery in, it slowly took over kind of everything in the back half of our building to the point where our homebrew supply store was it was less of a store where you could come in and browse and more like a file system. You'd end up walking in and you'd ask the person that was staffing the homebrew supply store that day, do you have such and such part? And they would jump up and dig in they would go to a shelf and find a box and say, yeah, we have that part, and pull it out. So it was kind of funny when we moved into the new location, people were walking in and they're like, oh, you have so much more stuff now. And it was like, no, we had all that stuff. It was just, we hid it. We didn't have a place to display it. So kind of both moves I think we made out of necessity. We just crammed as much as we could into our building it down at Douglas, and then had to move up to 3rd Street, and then we crammed as much as we could into the building at 3rd Street, and eventually had to move down to also 3rd Street. So our homebrew supply store is on the same street, just on the other side of downtown Lee Summit.
Yeah, so we're kind of hitting these things on homebrew shop, so I might just continue with that for a little bit. So what do you guys really enjoy about running a homebrew shop?
I enjoy the interaction and getting to talk to like beginner brewers and kind of show them the way through this process. And I'll let Brian. He's done a lot more of our classes and things like that, so I'm going to let him jump into that one.
Yeah, Brian, can you talk maybe about like some errors that you see homebrewers making that are pretty common, or like some things that you maybe see advanced homebrewers doing that you wish more people would know how to do? Just talk about some of that kind of stuff in general.
Is he on mute?
He might be. Let me see if I can change that for him. Where is his picture? Where is his picture? There he is. Brian, hit on mute, bud. There you go.
Cool. Sorry, I had an alarm going off. I had to mute myself for a second.
Oh, you're fine.
So I guess to kind of start off with what you asked Brad, I just enjoy talking to people about brewing beer. I mean, really, I get excited when I get to talk to people about different styles, because they all kind of have their unique things about each one. And so you can kind of dive into exploring a new recipe with a home brewer, or trying to dissect maybe a commercial beer that they want to clone or something like that. So I love talking to people about brewing and kind of breaking down every little recipe with everybody. The next question, like, what do I see people make the biggest mistake, or what do I see like all grain brewers or more experienced brewers doing that I wish more people know? I think it's kind of the one of the same answer, is water, using good water with your beer. I think a lot of new brewers kind of fall back on just sticking with tap water. And as we all know, a lot of that with fermentation, chloramines mixing with that, you can get a lot of nasty off flavors and really take your beer away from where you want it to be originally. And I think that's one thing that experienced brewers have, gone to and gravitated to is using not just necessarily reverse osmosis water or RO water, but also making additions, different salt additions, depending on the style of beer you're making. And just, going from tap water to RO water will take a good beer and make it great. And then taking RO water and supplementing that with salts, depending on your style and what you're going for, will make a great beer even better. So I would just say water is the answer to kind of both those questions.
Cool. If you guys are all right, we'll kind of shift gears, maybe talk about creating beers and creating recipes for beers and just some thoughts behind that. So let's maybe we'll go sours first. We'll talk about sour beers, and I'm sure Alex has his own opinions on some of these things, but we're here for your opinions. So, what process do you guys create to brew up a really good sour beer? Like I'm thinking some things that are really hot right now with you guys are probably like the sherbets and that kind of stuff. And what process are you guys going to create that base for that to make a really standout beer?
Yeah, the sours are a lot of fun to make because they're super easy. They don't take a long brew day at all, and the turnaround on them is really fast as well too. So um, they're fun to make. We sell a lot of them. They seem to be pretty popular. Um, I guess what was the I forgot the other question.
You're good. Like, what process would you recommend following, or how do you go about thinking about those beers and then seeing them through to tap?
Um, so we typically start off on a lot of our sours with a base, like our sherbets, for example. I think that's probably the one that we have the most variety on. And so we're using a base with two row and white wheat, and in kind of thinking about the recipe and kind of brainstorming about it, you just kind of breaking down what, my favorite, that was kind of my favorite dessert growing up was orange sherbet. So I've always had that in the back of my mind. And always kind of related that to a sour style. So kind of breaking down, the ice cream recipe in my head, even though I've never made it. Obviously there's milk, lactose. So we have lactose in the boil. There's a little bit of salt in there because it's, I guess, in the Goza style category. And so we definitely supplement it with a little bit of salt. You can also find salt in ice cream recipes too. So definitely a popular ingredient for that. Vanilla, that was another ingredient that we put in the secondary. We're not doing it, obviously in the boil or the transfer over, but we're doing it in the secondary. And then really from there, the fruit is just kind of wide open. I mean, you just pick your favorite fruit. I think for really that, the orange sherbet is one of my favorites, and then really just kind of springboard off of that with strawberry or pineapple, and just kind of whatever. That base is really good pretty much for anything. Um, and I think sours in general are really good, not just for experimenting with fruit flavors if you like them a lot too, but spices as well. We've done several sours that we've used. Actually, I think it was one of the first ones we did when we started brewing for like a Thanksgiving themed beer. We did a holiday sour. It had a cranberry puree in it with mulling spices. And so you can really use a lot of different flavors, I think, in the sour category. So,
And this some of the follow up questions might get into the nitty gritty, and if you guys aren't willing to share, that's okay. But you mentioned two row and white wheat. Are you doing a 50-50 split on that, or what's that looking like?
um, so no, we originally started this. A lot of these recipes come from, Brad, Bigsby, and myself as homebrewers. And so, as a homebrewer, one of the guys I learned from, who I don't think he's here in the meeting right now, but Alex Grumke, he was the guy who kind of introduced me into making sours as a homebrewer. And so a lot of these recipes have kind of stemmed and evolved from the original one I learned from him. So it's pretty close to the same thing. It's about 60% two row, 40% white wheat on that. I want to say the lactose addition, I think it's like a 10% addition. I'd have to double check. If anybody ever wants to put a recipe together, we'd be happy to, give them everything for it. But yeah, I'd have to double check on the lactose addition. But yeah, and there's not a lot to it. I mean, there's no hops in there. We don't even boil the sours at all. We basically bring it up to about 185, 190, just kind of for like the pasteurization effect there for about 15 minutes. And then we cool as we transfer over to the fermenter. And then we make our lacto addition at about 100 degrees, let it sit for 2 days, and then basically ferment with USO5 from that point. Typically takes a week-ish. Then we'll do any kind of like yeast dump off of our fermenter from that. And then we'll start basically putting puree and vanilla flavoring into the secondary, and then just kind of letting that sit and marinate.
Um, what method are you guys using to sour?
Lactobacillus. It'll go in at that about 100 degree point, and then from there, We wait about 2 days. And to answer Kevin's question, typically, no, we're not doing a second pasteurization. We're just going into the we've had good luck with just going straight into the USO5 and taking off with fermentation from there. Seems like the yeast kind of takes over and runs from that point.
You mentioned that you guys are souring for about 2 days. What temperature are you guys holding that at, and what pH, like what final pH, and maybe even post pasteurization pH are you guys looking for?
So we typically will pitch our lacto in at about 100 degrees, right around that temp, and then we don't have any kind of heaters hooked up to it, so we basically let time and temperature take care of itself. And so after typically 2 days, it's right in that mid 70s, maybe upper 70s temp. And then we'll kick on. We're using Inkbird chillers hooked up to a glycol unit. So then we'll kick the temperature down to about 70 degrees and then pitch USO5. pH on that, typically after, they all kind of vary because we do another one that doesn't have a lactose addition. So the pH on that one typically gets a little bit lower. But we're seeing in the low fours after our lacto time frame is up. When we're ready to pitch, that'll drop a little bit lower with fermentation, and then we'll see it kind of rise up a little again after fermentation is over.
Cool. And for maybe people who aren't as familiar with brewing sours, what is something that maybe homebrewers should look out for if they're trying to do this? Maybe some ways that this process could go maybe a little bit awry. I know it's really simple and it can be very simple, as you guys have kind of mentioned now, but what's something that you want to look out for as you're doing this process?
Gosh, man, to look out for, I don't know. That's a tough one. Like I said originally, it's a really easy style as a home brewer, especially to execute. Grumkey's original recipe is using a probiotic. Good Belly, I believe, was the brand name, and then I ended up going off with something else after that. But it's super easy to get that stuff. It's cheap. Probiotic pretty much at any store. Well, I guess now people are doing a lot of online shopping, so you could probably get something pretty specific in that field. But no hops involved with it. I don't know. I mean, maybe getting it too sour. I think I've had some. I think that's probably one of the biggest I guess one of the negatives that I've had off of some of my beers. I felt like they've gotten way too sour, and you can only have one of them before you end up having heartburn. So maybe take a little bit easy on your pitch on the lacto. That would be one thing that I guess kind of key in and look for in the whole process. But overall, it's a pretty fun and simple recipe to execute. So.
And I imagine you guys are probably using commercial pitches. Is there one that maybe is that we can get as homebrewers? Like I know that Imperial has one. Is there some stuff that you'd recommend if we're trying to do that route instead of the Good Belly route?
Yeah, I mean, experiment with any of them. They're all good. We use Omega liquid yeast a lot in that regard, so we like them. But White Labs offers a lacto pitch. We can get Imperial through our retail shop as well too. So we typically don't stock a lot of lacto. So if you do plan on wanting to do something like that, I would maybe plan it out a week ahead, 2 weeks ahead, so that way we can order something in particular for you. But other than that, yeah, and I would just say have fun with it. It's, as homebrewers, I mean, that's kind of what it's all about. So just kind of experiment, take good notes, and jump around and try different strains.
Cool. So we've been talking about sours for a little bit. We'll shift away from that, and maybe we'll talk about a hazy recipe. So like I know you guys have the various versions of your hazy, which you name all in a similar style or a similar name kind of genre with different spins. So like I know Neon Kittens, but then you also have Puppies with Lasers and all that kind of stuff, and if you could talk about what you guys are doing to formulate a good hazy recipe.
So our hazies, all based off of our original New England that we did, which was Neon Kittens. That was, again, I think one of the original recipes we started brewing. And again, that recipe, like a lot of them, kind of stemmed from our homebrew recipes. And so I had developed a New England that was kind of based off of WeldWorks Juicy Bits. Um, and so I had kind of tweaked it over several brewing recipes and come up with um, basically, 2-row base, flaked wheat, flaked oats, white wheat, at about a 20% on my grain bill, for kind of that higher protein malt involved with that. A little bit of crystal malt in there, about 6% carafoam we're using from Weyermann on that one. Um, and again, that's another one that we don't boil on, so it's a pretty simplified brew session there with that one. Hops on that, are all in the whirlpool. We don't do any again, we're not boiling, so there's no hops in the boil at all. So we're cooling from 185, 190 down to about 165, and we whirlpool for 40 minutes. And the Neon Kittens itself, we're using Vic Secret and Citra, the two hops that we use on that one there. A little bit more Citra than Vic. I'd have to double check on the percentages, but it's almost 50-50. It's just a little bit over Citra than Vic there. But really from that, some of our other New Englands kind of based off of the same grain bill. But like you all know, there's so many hops out there and varieties and new varieties coming out that, I mean, you can pretty much go any direction you wanted to. We try not to get too crazy with the hop pairings. We stick to one or two per recipe. We feel like that's a pretty good start on kind of pairing hops and kind of not getting them muddled and mixed up flavors kind of mashed in there. But you can really just kind of bounce around with that same grain bill, kind of use the same time frame with whirlpooling, same temperatures on whirlpooling, just kind of switch the hops up. And that's what a lot of our New Englands are. And then we've gotten into like the puppies with lasers, where not only have we switched up the hop varieties, but we've also switched up some of our malt. So that one is a rye. I've taken out some of the 2-row base malt and supplemented that with about 15% rye malt. Taken out some of the flaked wheat and then supplemented that with flaked rye. Kept the flaked oats, kept the white wheat the same, carafoam the same. Puppies with lasers specifically, that one is El Dorado and Idaho 7 are the two hops that we use on that one. And that was a really good beer. I like that one a lot. I love rye IPAs just in general. But yeah, you can just get kind of really crazy with it with just hop pairings and maybe just switching base malt a little bit.
Our newest New England Arcade Llamas, Brian actually threw in some crystal malt into there. And I had a customer text me over the weekend with a picture of it and say, it tastes really good, but is it supposed to look like this? It's a little bit darker. It's got the caramel malt in there, and I had to be like, yeah, we actually, that was intentional. There was probably not a ton of New England IPAs are using caramel malt in there, but this one we gave it a try, and I don't know. I really like the new one. It's pretty good. It definitely does look different because it's not the bright yellow that you get from a lot of New England IPAs, but it's a good drinking beer.
Do you guys mind me asking what yeast you're using in that or in those beers?
Yeah, we're using SO4. Well, actually, you know what? I take that back. That one specifically, we were using, and we try to do this whenever we get like pitches from Omega, just because of the expense and trying to save a little bit on margins and stuff. And we'll save the cake and reuse it on other beers. And so we had the same yeast cake that we used. It was an English strain. I think it was the British Ale 1006 from Omega. So that's what ended up getting used on Arcade Llamas. But the bulk of our New England IPAs are used with, or are fermented with SO4 English Ale.
And would you guys say that, is there a yeast that you guys are really digging on right now that is probably your favorite to brew with just across the board?
I don't know, Brad. Do you have any favorites?
I don't know that I have a favorite yeast. I think I just definitely have favorite combinations of the way yeasts pair with or work with particular beers. So I like the lager yeast that we're getting, our one more lager with, but obviously I don't like that yeast for a New England IPA or anything. So I don't know that I have a particular favorite yeast. I saw Brad Steele asked, and I know you can answer this one, Brian. Brad Steele had asked about how the mash goes with the rye in there for puppies with lasers.
Oh God, it's it's a pain, man. Uh, I hadn't brewed a lot of rye beers as a home brewer, but I'm very aware of how you need a lot of rye souls with beers like that and the mash, and that is extremely true. We verified that the very first batch we made with puppies with lasers. I think it was like normally I'm sparging, probably for about hour and a half on a lot of our beers, but that one in particular, I think I was in upwards of like 3.5 hours, almost 4 hours on that. I from then I've added quite a few rice hulls to the recipe to kind of help that a little bit. It still doesn't go as fast as others, but I've got it into about the 2 hour, 2.5 hour range, which is pretty manageable. And now that I know, it's more of an expected occurrence instead of kind of just a surprise, in the middle of a brew day. So
Before we totally get away from hazies, because we do want to talk about your guys' stouts and what you're doing there. Um, how do you guys go about creating like a hop profile for one of those beers? Like, how do you figure out what hop you're going to match with the other hops to really create what you want in that beer?
with you saying with the stouts, the hop
No, with the
profile.
hazies. Sorry.
Oh, with the hazies. Oh, well, like I said originally, we stick to typically two, maybe even just one, the hop on that. Just because we're new at doing this as well too commercially, so we just trying to get a good grasp on what these hops have to offer. Pairing wise, when we do put them together, we're trying to with hazies, we're trying to do tropical, fruity, citrusy kind of flavors, and so we're taking hops that have similar characteristics to that. So, for example, the one of the milkshake IPAs we just did, we're getting ready to fruit that with tangerine, and so we're using hops that have tangerine characteristics and citrus characteristics like Saburo and Citra, and those are the two hops that we used on that. Another milkshake right now, we are going to be using a strawberry puree in that. So we're looking for hops that kind of have berry flavors and characteristics, and so we use two hops kind of paired with that. But we keep it pretty simple. I think from just doing research and listening to podcasts and other professional brewers, when it gets to malt mixing and hop mixing, keeping it simple is a good key to stick to. The more malts and more hops you're throwing in there, the more opportunity for the flavors to get kind of muddled, and you're not really getting the true uh, representation of kind of what you're expecting out of your recipe. So I would say for the most part, when it comes to pairing, just keep it simple, two or three of each ingredient, and then just kind of move forward with that.
You kind of mentioned fruit already, but like, is there one that you guys are really digging on right now as far as fruit goes?
Fruit, yeah, I love pineapple. Pineapple is one of my favorite ones to put in there. The tangerine, that one's a really popular one. We just most recently sent one of our tangerine milkshakes off to competition, which unfortunately didn't happen because of all the cancellations going around the country. But that's been a really popular one of ours. How about you, Brad?
Recently we tapped our key lime milkshake IPA, and that one might be my favorite of the fruited milkshake IPAs that we've done. It definitely Definitely had good IPA characteristic, but it also felt like I was drinking a key lime pie.
Man, those flavors right now seem to be really hot. Like I'm just hearing, you know, anybody who puts out a key lime, but especially you guys, I just hear people talking about it. Like right now, you're seeing the chat blow up with people just talking about how fire that key lime is, man. Uh,
Thank you, guys.
uh, if you guys don't mind, let's switch to stouts. And if you guys start talking about barrel, that's fine. We do have like a later portion if you want to talk about wood and how you put stuff into wood. But if we diverge there now, that's fine too. Um, so like, what are some of the things that you guys are doing to create like a really great stout? Like I know Gully Wump for you guys is like the stout, and it's awesome. And I was just wondering like if there's some characteristics that you guys really strive for in those stouts and how you get that to come out in what you're brewing.
That's actually a good question. So the Goldwomp stout was actually Bigsby's homebrew recipe. So I couldn't really tell you kind of his inspiration on that one. We just kind of brought it in, brewed it, and it just was a huge hit to start out with. So that's kind of become kind of our house stout there. And then another one that was really popular was Brad's homebrew recipe, the one of our first barrel aged stouts that we did. So that was one of his recipes that we brought in and scaled up. But overall, in putting together stout recipes, I think one of the biggest things to look for is, your roasted malt addition. Anytime I'm using roasted malts and crystal malts for that matter too, I'm always looking at the the spreadsheet that maltster will put out on that and recommended dosage per batch. That's one thing to keep your eye on, because what can happen is you can get your mash extremely way too acidic for fermentation to take place, and then even if fermentation does take place, you can still have it too acidic where you get kind of those tangy kind of sourdough kind of qualities out of a stout or something like that. Some flavors can also be a little bit more soy sauce ish too. I think that happens a lot when you get a little bit high on the percentage of your roasted malt. So keep an eye on the roasted malt percentage. Just always refer back to the maltster's spreadsheet on that. Get online and check it out, and just make sure you fall within the parameters on the recommended dosage for that. So that's just one thing I always kind of fall back on. But for the most part, I also like to use like English style malts because they kind of have that biscuit kind of toasty flavor quality to it too. So I don't normally put a lot of two-row in our stout recipes. I typically go over and use Maris Otter. Anytime we're doing a stout recipe, I think that's just a good backbone to then add roasted malts and crystal malts as well too. Maris Otter is one that we use a lot. We have had some instances where we've not just had enough Maris Otter, so we've supplemented some of that with Golden Promise, which is another English style malt. Similar, profiles right along the same line there too. But I kind of like to do that as the base malt for stouts. Yeah, finish them. I like to finish mine a little bit big. So I go a little bit higher on mashing. I'm typically in like the 155 range when I'm doing stouts. And so I like to have a little residual sweetness left over after fermentation's done, kind of add a little bit of sweetness and body to the beer. But, to each his own. Some people like to go a little bit lower. I don't think there's any problem with that if you're enjoying the beer.
What are you guys aiming for as a FG?
Typically final gravity on a lot of ours are right around 1016, 1018. Those are just kind of the base stouts that we make. The barrel aged stouts, we've kind of learned over the last year of barrel aging our beers. We typically would go into the barrel at right around 1020, 1025-ish. And, after a few months in the barrel, it can kind of come off a little bit watered down and thin, even at like 1020, 1025. So more recent batches that we've been barrel aging have been upwards in like the 1030 final gravity range on that. Again, just kind of adds a little bit more sweetness to kind of the thinning aspect that the barrel aging does to the beer.
And what Like, let's say, could you break that down OG as far as you guys are going for pre-fermentation?
Yeah, I mean, just really based off of the style we're going for. We've done beers upwards of like 1120, I think. So 1.120, I think, is one of the higher ones that we've gotten to. And we're at a final gravity right around like 1030, 1035. So yeah, we've gone up pretty high. If that efficiency really takes a hit when you get that much grain in your mash tun and you're trying to extract that much sugar out of your grains. So those are a little bit tougher to make, but um, in the end, when you're drinking them, they're well worth the effort. So
Cool. And you hit some of the wood characteristic stuff too, so I appreciate that. So this is kind of an overarching beer question, and it's kind of just a philosophy, really. What's your guys' philosophy on the beers that you brew? Like, do you have a different goal for each one in mind, or like, are you saying, hey, this is gonna be our base style, and we're gonna see what we can do with it? Like, do you stick to things that you like? Do you follow industry trends? What are you guys trying to create with your image through your beers?
Brad.
Man, I thought that was a Brian question. Um, so the beginning of that, so the end of that was, what are we trying to create with the image through our beers? Can you repeat the beginning of that? Sorry, I was
Yeah, and
breaking up a little bit.
this is one that like we've been asking everybody, and I keep trying to find a better way to ask it, and I have not come up with the words for it yet, so I apologize. But like, what you guys brew, for example, is like what is an aspect that makes up grains and taps, and like what are you guys doing to create that image of grains and taps as far as beer goes? So like, are you guys sticking to certain styles? Like, are you trying to follow trends? What are you guys trying to do?
I would think it's maybe balance is kind of what we're going for, because we do have the, we talked tonight about stouts and IPAs and sours. But we also take a lot of pride in just traditional styles, our red ales, our amber ales, um, English mild ale. I think somebody was drinking that tonight, might have been Workman. Um, and those are kind of the beers that don't get talked about, don't get as many people excited about, but I think it's probably one of our biggest points of pride to be able to brew a traditional style really well.
Yeah, Tony mentioned that last week as well. He mentioned just like probably his highest, or I think he said exactly his highest scoring beer was an English mild, but
Mhm.
it didn't go all the way. It never made like mini best of show or anything like that because it's only an English mild. So, like, how are you guys, uh, like, and this kind of drifts into another question, but how do you guys keep your energy for that kind of stuff when that's not what maybe the consumer is looking for?
It, I think it's definitely a balancing act when we try to plan out brew days, because definitely, there's certain beers that if we don't have on tap, people are going to be looking for them. They're going to be asking, why don't you have a third milkshake IPA on tap, as opposed to, oh, this was a really good brown ale. I wish you would have two brown ales on tap. So it's definitely a balancing act, but we kind of have to realize that sometimes people that are hunting down a hazy or a milkshake IPA, they're going to come in and try your milkshake IPA, then move on to another beer. But that brown ale drinker, they might come in and have four of those brown ales. So it's there's kind of a difference in the beers that people get super excited about versus a good just drinking beer. And I think it's important to have both of those options on your draft wall to kind of please everybody out there.
So maybe are you guys trying to use some of those beers that people instantly go to right away to maybe open up what their possibilities are for other beers? So say for example, if you're like, we're gonna have this tangerine milkshake IPA on, and people are gonna go for it first, and we're gonna say, hey, have you tried this mild ale or something like that?
Sometimes, and it definitely is easier if you're behind the bar to steer people into a similar direction. So maybe if they are drinking the tangerine milkshake IPA, we would steer them to something more like like back when we were actually a tap room 4 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago or whatever. We had Friendly Suggestion on, which is I would say a traditional IPA. I was telling people it's a 2016 IPA because it's the kind of IPA you would have seen 3 or 4 years ago that would have been really popular, kind of West Coast style, as opposed to everything now being hazy and have lactose in it or all of that. But we have a couple IPAs that are just clear drinking. West Coast actually, bitter IPAs or whatever. So we'll usually try to steer people towards those from the milkshakes and things like that. But it's a little bit harder jump to steer somebody into a mild from an IPA, depending on that person's range and palate and what they like to drink.
You guys are kind of getting into this area, which is just owning a brewery and running a brewery in general. So we'll go down that path if you're all right with that. How do you guys go about creating a brand or an image or a vision for your brewery? So like say if somebody comes to Lee Summit, they're passing through for business or whatever, like what is the thing that you want them to remember about Grains and Taps? And then how do you guys make sure that you're doing that? And that's one of the things that they remember.
I think the biggest thing, and it's beyond the beer, it's beyond anything we do with the product we put out. It's the attitude and the the friendliness they see when they walk in the door. Because I think the biggest thing about the brewery is, and the tap room, and this well before it was a brewery, is just be that place where people can come. And one of the things I'm most proud of about this business is how many people I know that are good friends now that met each other at Grains and Taps. They didn't know each other before meeting there, but now there's a lot of groups of friends that I see that it's kind of cool to see that, that's kind of where they met.
And I'm going to dive in maybe a little bit more on that because there are people who may be looking to open a brewery or something. What do you guys do to instill that in your staff? So when people come in, the staff is all on board on creating that atmosphere or creating that point of education for those customers. Like, how do you guys go about instilling that inside of your employees?
I think it's just a matter of, I guess, trying to show that same environment to the employees we hire, and hope, try to bring it into the, the culture, not just something you can train into people, but something that they truly want to be a part of and share with everybody. And the, some of our staff is people that were already on the other side of the bar and they've made that jump, to being part of the staff or whatever. So they kind of already are familiar with the place and maybe already friends with a lot of our, our regular clients and things like that.
Yeah, because that's one of the things that I really appreciate just about breweries in Kansas City. But, like if I come in, for example, like on a Thursday when I could come in where you guys are doing like customer appreciation and that kind of stuff, like Jenny always knows my name, and I hadn't been there in 2 weeks because whatever else, it's just, I really appreciated that about what you guys do there. And it's really cool to see how you guys are creating that culture within your employees, which I think is very important. So shifting gears more about the brewery, and Brad, this one might be more for you, but Brian, this may be a place where you chime in, like you were talking about with the rye on that mash. Like, what is one thing that surprised you most about opening a brewery or opening a home brew store?
Surprised me the most. I don't know if I have a great answer to that. It's just, I guess, new things every day. Like whatever I think I'm going to go, when I leave my house in the morning, whatever I think I'm going to go do at the brewery that day or at Grains and Taps, seldom ends up being the thing that I do. Um, Whether I spend 3 hours fixing a toilet or, you know, something like that. It's just always, I guess I don't have any one big thing that's a surprise to me about it as much as just every day as a new surprise of, what's going to be happening, whether it's, something to do with, something we're involved in with like the downtown community or just something that breaks inside the building and suddenly that's our project for the day.
Okay, this is one that we like to ask, and if you don't feel comfortable sharing, that's okay. But Brian, this one's probably more for you. Um, what would you say is maybe the, and I'm not going to mince words, so I apologize if this doesn't come out very eloquently. What's maybe like the most surprising or dumbest thing that's ever happened in the brewery?
Dumbest thing I've done, or just like dumbest thing in general that's happened up at the brewery?
I mean, if you want to throw somebody else under the bus, that's fine.
No, I don't know. Dumbest thing, I don't know, man. There's a lot of little goofy things that happen over the course of working with one another day in and day out. I can't even think of like pinpoint one thing. I guess one thing that was kind of dumb was when we had that fire that kind of shut us down a couple years ago. There wasn't really anybody's fault in general, but it was just kind of a unfortunate event that occurred. Maybe with a little bit of a silver lining because we ended up kind of getting pushed more towards being a brewery after that. Really anything that's kind of slowed us up, this whole shutdown that we have going on right now. But over the course of kind of tagging along with Brad and Brian on this business adventure over the last 6 years, I mean, like Brad said, nothing really surprises you at this point. Kind of the ins and outs of owning a brewery or just owning a business in general. There's just always something that happens every day. You don't think it could get any weirder or worse, and then a few weeks go by or a month goes by, and then something else kind of sets the bar again. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess today it was a little silly. I was using the hose out of the utility room, and the hose dropped and fell on the handle and squirted me in the face for a little while as I was trying to scramble for it, all by myself in the brewery. So I don't know. There's just little things like that happen from time to time. It's kind of silly.
Oh, man.
I think we've all had that valve that you think is closed and it's, for whatever reason, you turn it to the open direction or whatever and get a good bath that day.
Yeah.
I'll never forget one time I was doing a small batch kind of thing with the guys at Diametric, and they have that handle hose that you squeeze like opposite of every other hose, and it was the first time I ever grabbed it. And I just like blasted myself straight in the face. So like, I totally hear you guys there. So this is something that like we've been trying to form into a question, and it comes off different every week. So if we need to dive in on it a little bit, that's fine. But can you guys maybe talk about your social media presence and what you guys use as strategies to make that a marketing tool for you, and how maybe if you could talk about how that's been successful for you, maybe not so successful. Like, what are you guys doing to maybe market a little bit?
So definitely we're big on Facebook, Twitter, and Bixby runs our Instagram account. Untapped at this point, I would consider a big piece of social media. That one's kind of Facebook. I try to make an ad or something, put some kind of content out there every day. Whereas Untapped, you pretty much set your beer out there and you don't touch it much from that point. There's not like you don't make Untapped posts. You check in beers or whatever. Um, I try to mix it up. I try to, we try to make things that are informative. So like what events we're doing and stuff like that, but also throw as much humor as we can out there, as well as just throwing, um, informational type stuff. Um,
How like Mac last week talked about, if you're gonna do a post, do it only once a day, or that kind of stuff. Make it small in word length. Like, are you guys utilizing any of those things to make sure that it pops and is really out there for people to see?
yeah, we you know, typically we'll make one post a day, maybe two, but they'll be kind of spread out. Um, Unless there's some kind of event going on or something where we're kind of adding updates or something, like if we're doing like a tapping or something, we might post some pics during the event saying this is what's happening live or whatever. But I would agree with the you can kind of dilute what you're putting out there if you put too many posts, um, unless you're just one of those accounts that can really just constantly be posting or whatever. Um, but for me, getting one or two posts set up and out there on top of anything else that uh, is going on is kind of about what I can handle every day. So both I think that's Nigel disagrees, but um, sometimes I do fear, like if I were to post 3 or 4 things a day, the one that I actually think is important that I want everybody to see, I worry that they'll just see the cat meme or something that we posted.
Yeah, and not everybody's Nigel on their phone the entire day. Cool. Well, let's maybe we'll shift gears a little bit and talk about some more things that we really appreciate that you guys do as a club. And you guys can give us some specifics about that. So we've been talking a lot recently about Blarney, and we were wondering, like, what is it like to run a festival? What goes behind that? What's the easiest? What's the hardest? What was unforeseen? All that stuff about a festival. If you could go into that, that'd be cool.
So as far as hosting Blarney, you know, I guess that's one thing that has been back to that. What's the most surprising thing to you? The first year we hosted Blarney, it was because the Lee Summit downtown Main Street, um, it was in conjunction with the Emerald Isle Parade that happens every Snake Saturday. They asked if we would be willing to host a beer tasting to take up some of the time between the Irish breakfast and when the parade started. So I said, yeah, we'll get some homebrewers together. Uh, we'll get that going. The first Blarney Brew Off, I know a handful of you were there. It was 63 people, including the brewers. I think we had 10 brewers, and that's being a little bit generous because I brewed some beer and set like my dad up, serving some of that beer. I brewed it with him, and we kind of pulled some extra people in just to kind of get this thing going. But everybody loved it. It was an awesome experience. It was on the back porch of Mingle, back when Mingle was around, and we always partnered with Jess. And every year afterwards, everybody said, okay, you got to do it bigger and better next year. So we graduated from the back porch to the parking lot that is down. It was next to Mingle, off of Main Street. So it got really big at that point. Basically, over the 6-7 years that Blarney ran, it went from a 60-something person festival to last year was about 900 people, and the Planners Peanut Mobile called me 4 days before it and asked if they could come, and I kind of feel like that's the probably the pinnacle of party planning for Brad. Is one time I threw a party that the Planners Peanut Mobile showed up.
You're saying the pinnacle of your professional career has been working with the Planters Peanut Mobile?
I mean, I don't think that the Wienermobile or the Goodyear blimp are ever going to call me up and ask to come to a party that I throw. So, as far as
Selling
party
yourself
planning
too
for
short,
me,
Brad. You're selling yourself too short, man. They're calling. They're getting ready.
could be. Um, but yeah, and then this year, kind of for me, it was always it was both one of the things I was most excited about, most proud of to be able to be a part of that huge festival where we had last year we had about 45 homebrewers. To just something I was personally just freaked out about the whole time because it went from this 60th person festival to now there's 900 people at this thing, and it's definitely not what we envisioned the first year. This year the plan was to combine it with another downtown festival. The Rotary Club was kind of taking it over. So it was going to be their festival with us just kind of working with you guys, working with the home brewers. And that's, for me, that was much more of a relief because that's kind of where we started and everything. But unfortunately, as everybody's noticed, that's getting pushed back, and I'm kind of waiting to hear. You can't really plan anything right now because nobody really knows what's going on. We are incredibly grateful that just kind of by luck we decided to combine it, because had we not done that, it would have been, the date for it would have been March 21st, and we would have both been fully invested in it, but we would have been canceled. So just by blind kind of by luck there, we didn't end up with that. It was going to be a May 9th thing, so we weren't all in, and I think the Rotary Club was not yet all in on it. So
Well, and everybody's saying it in the chat, but like I think that was the first festival that I participated in as a home brewer, and it was probably one of my favorite festivals, if not my favorite festival, because it's small enough where everybody knows each other, but at the same time, it's competitive enough. And I don't know if competitive is the right word, but it's enough to the place where you get people who that might be the only festival they go to. If that makes sense. So that was the only time for people to try my beer. And like my parents even came in town. I'm from St. Louis, so like my parents drove all the way in to try our beer, and try other people's beer. And my dad's a whiskey guy, and to see him walking around slamming beers, that was something to see. So
yeah, and I think as a business, our goal was always for that festival, kind of just people get some recognition just as a business out of that. I to this day think there's a good contingent of people that probably know the Blarney Brew Off that still don't know Grains and Taps. Is how kind of big that festival got, that we were kind of, I don't know, just kind of a weird fact that.
yeah, and so I'll tie this into our next question. You guys have a really good tradition, or at least on the outside, it seems like a really good tradition of offering homebrewers scale ups, doing festivals, these kind of things, like really reaching out to people who are doing a not professional level of what you guys do. And I was wondering if you guys might be able to talk about like why you do that, why you value that, and have you found that to maybe be beneficial for your business?
Found the sorry, I'm trying to break down the.
Yeah, sorry. So like to sum up, like maybe talk about why you do as many scale ups as you do, why you do Blarney, and have you found that by tying yourself in with these things that it's helped your business at all?
um I would hope so. It's definitely obviously this group of brewers and everything, that's kind of where I feel like we come from. Not I didn't meet ZZ Hops until a little bit after we opened a home brew supply store, and we're really grateful that we kind of got introduced to the group and everything. But I feel like the home brewing community is still it's always going to be our kind of our base, because this is everybody that we kind of grew up with as brewers. So I think those scale ups are a lot of fun. Hopefully those of you that did it with us had a lot of fun doing it. But it's, I don't know, just a way for us to share kind of what we love doing with more people than just ourselves.
Do you find, does that help you guys maybe feel more like homebrewers again? Like, is that a way to maybe break up the commercial side of what you do into something more experimental, like you were when you were homebrewers?
Yeah, it absolutely reminds me of homebrewing. Having the guys back there talking about the setup and their setups and stuff like that reminds me of being in the garage and chatting with my neighbors and kind of talking to them about everything. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed all of the skill ups. It was a good time.
And I was wondering maybe if you guys could dive in. I know the last scale ups that you guys did, and I think it was tied in with Blarney from last year. I might be wrong about this, but I know you had the homebrewers come in, design a beer, and then they also designed the price point for that beer. Could you guys maybe talk about that process? Why you decided to do that for that scale up?
Yeah, I thought it would be kind of cool. Everybody in this group at some point, no matter how serious you took it, we all kind of play brewer, to a certain extent as home brewers. And I know I, as a home brewer, always had, the dream of what if I was doing this, professionally? What if my beer was going to more people than just my small group of friends? So instead of just making it a scale up, we decided to make it a competition where it's kind of you're a mini brewery within a brewery. Um, you know, how do you want to price your beer? How do you want to sell that beer and all that? Just kind of add an extra little twist to the concept of the scale up. I think it went really well, other than being kind of shut down a couple weeks ago. Um, but and that way we got to bring in. We had 6 different breweries doing it with us, as opposed to, well, this one brewery won, and they're the one that gets to do a scale up. Um, the 6 teams that were chosen, and it kind of did uh, span a wide range of brewers. We had the winners of the Blarney Brew Off from the beer side, but there were also categories for branding, and those were chosen, off of their, the hard work that they put into the facade for their home brewery, or their posters, or all that stuff. So it was kind of cool because some of the people that won the branding are actually, very experienced homebrewers that have done other scale ups before, because they've won competitions. But it left the possibility open that we could get, some brand new homebrewers getting to do the scale up, that maybe haven't brewed very much, but they, uh, managed to get in off of the branding side. So that was kind of something I thought would be cool, just because, we learn from the home, we learn from the scale ups from you guys as much as you're, maybe learning about our process. So
So I've got about 2 more questions, and then you guys can refresh a beer if you'd like, and then we'll get to some of the fun stuff that you guys are probably more interested in talking about. Um, but what would you guys say? Are there beer trends that have happened or continuing to happen or are new that have had a really great effect on what you do at the brewery?
I think um, just the current trends. I think the milkshake IPAs are huge right now, and for us, we kind of had this, what I consider an advantage, because we were a tap room for 5+ years before becoming a brewery. So I feel like we kind of had a little bit of a feel for what kinds of beers people were buying quicker than other types of beers. So jumping into a brewery, we weren't just trying to guess, hey, what's going to be popular for us to brew. We had a little bit of an idea coming in, just being kind of a hub for a lot of other beers already.
Yeah, Brian, do you resonate with that pretty well?
Yeah, yeah. I pretty much follow the same suit. We typically kind of get a good feel of already being, a draft location, a variety of beers and styles on draft. So we've not, necessarily followed with particular parameters on anything, but I would say for the overall part, we're pretty much keeping everything pretty unique and diverse across the board.
All right, so this one's for both of you. Maybe we'll start with Brian and then go to Brad. What's getting you excited about beer these days? Like, are you working on some project that's really pumping you up? Are you seeing a trend come through? Like, for example, last week Tony and I talked about how cool Brute IPA could have been, and then it, like in a flash, it was gone. You
Hmm.
know, are there some things that are getting you excited about beer?
Yeah, we tried a brewed IPA. Yeah, it was all right. It was good. Um, New things that get me excited about beer. Oh man, I mean, I guess it would just be the evolution of hops and yeast. I think those two things really push the market a lot as far as what kind of variety you can find out there. There's those new Norwegian strains that we're receiving from Omega and some other yeast manufacturers right now, fermenting at warmer temperatures. I would say that's probably the one of the newer ones that we've kind of seen come across um, the market, and then just the evolution and new varieties that we're seeing in hops, and even unfortunately we haven't really gotten our hands on any, but using different types of like cryo dust and hop dust that a lot of these larger breweries are getting their hands on, kind of proprietary stuff right now that they're doing with hop oils and alpha acids and stuff like that. So really anything in those fields kind of pique my interest, I think, the most as far as future brews are concerned.
Yeah, maybe before Brad jumps in, you you're mentioning Kvike with those higher temperature strains, right?
Hmm.
And
Yeah, yeah. I think there's a couple familiar with like three different ones from Omega, and I know that there's some other ones. I think Imperial has come out with a few that are kind of getting up there as well too, and a lot of other yeast manufacturers are kind of coming out with some new ones as well.
have you have you guys experimented with those at all? And have you found them to be successful in anything that you're making?
Yeah, we did once last year get our hands on a pitch of, I think it was the Hornendal Kvik from Omega, and we used that successfully on three different beers, and we enjoyed the overall outcome. We used them on a lot of bigger beers that we had. It wasn't any of like our New Englands or anything. I think we did a couple of barley wines, and I think another one was a quad. The styles that we used for that. We haven't really gone any further than that as far as the Kvik yeast strains are concerned. But I really did enjoy the barley wine. I think it had a really nice kind of a stone fruit characteristic, kind of really highlighted that out of the yeast with that Norwegian strain.
I've not heard of people doing bigger beers like that. That's interesting to me.
Yeah, yeah. We just gave it a shot. So I don't know if there was anything in particular that kind of nudged us in that direction of using like a big beer on it. We just were in the need and wanted to make something that was really big, put it in a barrel. And so those two things kind of just aligned and worked out like that.
Cool, Brad. Anything getting you excited about beers or the brewery these days?
Probably the thing that I guess I would say I'm excited about is just seeing probably currently just everybody coming together and supporting each other. Uh, what Mac's doing with Together We Can every other Saturday, and seeing hundreds of people show up for that. I would say that's what's getting me most excited right now, when there's, you know, a lot of other things to maybe not be as excited about. There's definitely always the community and the camaraderie of the craft beer community to fall back on and be excited about.
Yeah, we spoke about that last week, or maybe 2 weeks ago. I think we've talked about it every week, honestly. Together We Can, and how that's something that's very unique to Kansas City breweries, and it's really cool that you guys are a part of that. So we're getting towards the tail end here, but this would be a good time if you guys need freshen up a beer or something like that. Maybe got about 5-10 more questions that go by pretty quick. You guys want to grab another beer?
Yes.
Go for it. I'll give you a couple minutes. I'm going to grab one too. Andy, yeah, I'll give you an update when we stop recording. Mac, that's awesome. Nigel, I just had the Cerveza Royale. Oh man, you got some spotted cow there, Brian?
Yeah. Yeah, I do.
Man.
Justin Mayfield dropped this off. Is he still in the club? Is he on right now? Is he watching me?
I don't know if Justin's in right now. I'm kind of going through a couple of things before Brad gets back, just answering some stuff. Mac, I do have everybody's email. If you send me whatever you want me to send them, if it's not just boobs, I'll send it. Cool. Mac, I'll text you my address. Mac, just send it to the ZZ Hops social email address. It is social@zzhops.com. Yeah, thank you, Aaron. Chris, I do not want that from Mac. All right, Brad's back. You guys ready to keep going for just a little bit? This next part is pretty quick. Brad, you good to go? All right, I will try and unmute you. There you go. Where's Brian? Did Brian lag out finally? I'm just kidding. Brian might have lost some internet connection. So when he jumps back in, Brad will get him in on some stuff. So Brian, these next few parts, like the next one's just about home brewing, new and advanced brewer kind of stuff, and then we'll get to some rapid fire fun questions. Let's talk about new home brewers. What is something you think, like the first thing a new home brewer should consider before, or like right as they're getting into the hobby?
First thing they should consider, obviously, the very first thing you hear is cleaning and sanitation. Obviously, that's any book you read or website is going to say that's the most important part of home brewing. Second thing I would think is just maybe don't take it too seriously. Um, I know I was pretty worried. I thought for sure that, the first few batches I brewed, I was like, I'm gonna ruin this. I'm gonna do something dumb, and this is ruin this entire batch. And kind of stepping back, it's supposed to be a fun experience. It's supposed to be a good time. So, and a lot of times you're not really gonna ruin it if you're doing that first part clean and sanitized properly. There's a lot of right ways you can go with home brewing from there.
Cool. What do you think would be maybe the most overlooked piece to brewing good beer at home?
I think, and this is it kind of gets into once you're maybe more advanced home brewer, temp control. I think that plays a huge role in fermentation. Um, Even like in our brewery, that was probably one of our biggest focuses when we were, kind of designing and building the brewery. We were planning out temp control and that kind of stuff well before we were actually looking at what kind of brew house and stuff we wanted to put on there.
Yeah, we haven't talked about that yet. Really quick, can you just give us a rundown on what your brew house looks like? Like what you guys are running?
Sure. It is. It's probably one of the probably one of the smallest breweries in Kansas City as far as capacity wise. We're typically brewing 2-barrel batches. It's a Blickman 3-vessel system for our brew house, and it's their one barrel brew house with their extension products on it that make it into a 2-barrel brew house. So the capacity in each vessel is 110 gallons. From there, we go into a series of fermenters. We've got 4 2-barrel fermenters, and that's typically what we'll go into on just a standard batch. We've also got 3 1-barrels and 4 half-barrels. So we can do different things where we split up a batch to test it. So like if we want to take our batch into 2 1-barrels after we're done brewing it, we can do one with say a Belgian yeast, and then the other one with an American yeast, and see kind of how those 2 different beers play out and do different things with that. We've got 2 different glycol chillers running to each. One runs, I think, 4 of our fermenters. The other one runs the rest, and each of the fermenters is just plugged into Inkbird controllers with a temp probe going into the well of each of the fermenters.
Brian, to catch you up, the first thing that I asked Brad was, what is the first thing a home brewer should consider when getting into the hobby?
First thing they should consider. Um, hmm. I don't know. I mean, I guess it would just be back to what I originally said at the beginning of the meeting, talking about water. I mean, I really think that that is probably the biggest thing that I experienced as a home brewer that kind of took me into another area, is just switching my water. I would say that's the least you could do. It's extremely cheap. It's what, 30, 20 cents or something like that a gallon if you get it, in those milk jugs at the store, or you can get a water cooler jug and have them filled up for even cheaper than that. But I would say that's probably one of the first areas as a beginning brewer. Just get good clean water. It's your biggest ingredient. So this is probably one of the biggest things I would consider.
Would you also consider that to be like the most overlooked piece to brewing good beer at home, or what would you
Yeah,
think?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, good water, man. Yeah, I think, looking back, where I'm at now, and everything that we've done, um, commercially in the last 2 years, and then just as a home brewer, getting to that point, I think it all falls back on water. I mean, just having fresh ingredients, and that's one thing that I would always talk to a lot of brewers in the homebrew shop about is I always kind of do a lot of relating it to like cooking. So the better ingredients, the fresher ingredients that you have cooking a meal, the better it's going to turn out. The more of an opportunity you have, for it to turn out good. And so I think the same is true with brewing, and that would imply starting off with great water. So
What would maybe you guys say is the difference between like beginning home brewers and advanced home brewers? Obviously, we've already talked about water. We've talked about fermentation temperature. What would you maybe say that advanced home brewers are doing that maybe beginning home brewers are not, other than those two things?
I would say advanced homebrewers probably brew more often. And it's just perfecting your craft, not necessarily just perfecting recipes in general and tweaking them, but just perfecting your craft overall as a whole. But I would say advanced homebrewers probably brew more frequently than people who are just starting out and getting into the hobby. So I would say with anyone starting out, besides just doing the small things like getting good water or fermentation, temperature control and fermentation, I would just brew more. Try to get as brew different styles. Take good notes, so that way when you're brewing a second batch or a third batch of a particular recipe, you have kind of a way to look back and tweak it accordingly if there was something you did or did not like about it. So
Brad, is that kind of where you're at on all this too?
Yeah, I would agree. I don't have a whole lot to add.
Cool. Um, let's talk about malts and hops for a second for homebrewers. Would maybe each of you pick one or two malts you would suggest that homebrewers keep on hand, and then same for the hops?
malts that I would definitely keep on hand. I would definitely keep two-row and Maris Otter. Those two base malts right there. Keep those two on hand. That way you can kind of switch in and out through a variety of styles as your base malt. The third one, a malt, I would probably say maybe a light crystal malt, maybe even something extremely light like a Carafoam, something like a dextrin malt. Keep a little bit of that on hand because you can use that a lot in recipes as well too. Um, hops, Cascade, I think is an awesome hop. It's extremely versatile. I love using Cascade. You can use it on almost anything: IPAs, brown ales, stouts. So Cascade is a great hop to have. Citra is extremely popular in a lot of IPAs and pale ales, so you can get away with having Citra Cascade on hand. Um, but like I've mentioned before, I think hops and yeast are probably a category that are expanding as we speak. So I would leave that third option as just maybe the new variety, the new thing that's out there. If you're reading, blogs or magazines and they're talking about new hops, like I mentioned, we just got Sabro in recently. So that's one that we like using a lot now. Before, when we started out, Vic Secret was a really popular one. So we like using that a lot. And Idaho 7. So we've kind of had some hops that have kind of come in and out of our favorite range, but I would say Cascade, Citra, and then leave that third one as kind of the experimental, kind of that new one that you're reading about that you always want to try.
Same for you, Brad?
Yeah, I think so. I think for malts, definitely two-row is your most. If you're just gonna have two on hand, two-row is gonna be what you're gonna put in most recipes. And then for your second one, yeah, either Maris Otter or another base malt, Pilsen or maybe white wheat.
Cool. So here comes I think the questions that we enjoy most. I definitely enjoy asking them. I threw Tony off on a few of them last week. So what I guess we'll do the order is Brad's up right now. So I'll have Brad answer first, and then Brian, you go, and then we'll go to the next question. This is our rapid fire section before we get to the end. So Brad, favorite non-Kansas City brewery?
I'm gonna say first one that's popping into my head, Bell's.
Sierra Nevada.
Sorry, I'm typing as you talk. So if there's a weird like lag, I promise I probably haven't died yet. Let's go reverse order for this one. Brian, coolest tap room you've been to? Brad, you're after him.
Coolest tap room was when I was with my buddy out in Newport News, O'Connor Brewing out there. It was a really awesome place. It was kind of like on the cusp of like the industrial commercial district. And so it was just a really cool kind of setup. They had their back doors opened up. You were sitting right next to like the brewery and kind of the loading docks, and the ocean wasn't very far away from that. It was just a really awesome atmosphere. It was a lot of fun.
Brad?
I'm trying to think. I was in. Let's see. There's a handful coming to mind. I spent about a week in Portland, Oregon. There's about 4 or 5 that were awesome.
I guess if
I'm is this brewery tap room or any kind of tap room?
it can be anything, man. This is up to
I'm
you.
gonna go 100 Bere in downtown Bucharest.
That sounds sweet. We could talk about a whole travel thing if we wanted to.
It was kind of a little bit just being somewhere where there wasn't a whole lot of craft beer options, and then you come across this place where kind of walking through the desert, and all of a sudden there's mirage, but it's
Is this one of those like ruined pubs that I hear about that you're kind of mentioning?
no, it's just a small tap room with a lot of craft beer options. Um,
Cool.
Obviously, a lot of European beers.
Yeah. I guess since you guys like shared yours with me, I don't know if you care, but I'll share mine with you.
Care.
Favorite non-KC brewery probably right now for me. I'd probably have to say True. I swung by there. I had like 6 hours in. Everybody else is saying we don't, but I swung by there. I just had like a couple of hours in Denver. That was pretty cool. Black Project's there too. I mean, they have a freaking wing as their bar top. That was pretty sweet. Um, but as far as tap room, it'd probably have to be Black Project. That was really cool. They let me go back and check out like the stainless fermenters, and then go back and check out their barrel project. So, okay, Brian, I got your face here right now, and then Brad, you'll follow them up. Favorite beer of all time?
Oh shit! Of all time, one beer that I think about all the time is called Adult Human. It was a beer. It was a collaboration between Trillium and a brewery in Virginia called The Veil, and it used Vic Secret and agave nectar. It was a double dry hop, New England, and I had that beer 3 years ago with my good friend up in Chicago who got that beer, and I think about that beer probably a few times a month in the last 3 years. So that's got to be one of my favorite ones of all time.
Was that an IPA or a sour or what?
Yeah, it's a New England. It was a New England IPA from Trillium and The Veil.
How do you spell that second word?
The Veil, Veil. Is that my? Let
And
me.
are they kind of in Boston like Trillium is?
Um, they're actually out of Norfolk, Virginia. So they're both East Coast breweries.
Sorry, I've got anonymous mink on my Google Doc is taking notes for me, so I'm kind of trying to ask questions to help them fill in. So whoever is anonymous mink filling out my notes right now, I appreciate that. Brad, your turn. Favorite beer of all time?
I'm gonna go. If I had to just pick one beer, I would say something like a Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, just like just a true down the middle reliable beer.
Something you can crush a lot of, Brad?
I would say so.
I like that about you. Okay. Favorite, and I have a caveat to this for those of you who were here last week. Um, I'll start with Brad. Favorite non-malt ingredient, and hops are not allowed.
Non-malt ingredient and hops are not allowed.
I can see Alex Workman being visibly angry, but we're gonna see what they say.
Can I go second on this one? I know I've probably got a good answer. It's not.
Sure, yeah, Brian.
Yeah, I got a good one. We had this occasionally we'll get samples from Amoretti with their purees because they offer a lot of purees for brewing and craft beer drinking. And we have this ingredient that we did, this lemon meringue puree that we had, and we sampled it out in one of our sherbets. I think it was the orange sherbet, just as a sample. And I think this has to be a future beer at some point, but it's got to be one of my favorite ones that I tasted. Is the lemon meringue puree from Amoretti. Yeah, I would have to say that's probably one that sticks out in the top of my head right away.
All right, Brad.
Barrel. Bourbon. Can I say bourbon? Can I say a bourbon barrel?
You can say whatever you want. If it's not malt or hop, yeah, man.
Bourbon barrel. That's my.
I'll ask you to follow that up once more. Have you had a barrel in the brewery that is bourbon that you preferred more over the others?
Probably my favorite of the ones we've done on bourbon was our anniversary stout, and I'm trying to remember if that was who that was from. Was it Brian? That wasn't Heaven Hill, was it? The anniversary stout.
That What was that?
Do you remember whose bourbon the anniversary stout barrel was from? Like the distillery.
No, I couldn't remember that. We did that one a little bit over a year ago.
All right. So, Brad, you went second on the last one. You're going first on this one. Even if you asked me to go second, you're still going first. Most underrated beer style, in your opinion?
Red ale.
Brian.
Yeah, that's a good one. I was going to say Pilsner, but I think Red Ale, yeah, Red Ale is one of my favorites. But yeah, I would say Pilsner is probably underrated. I don't think enough breweries make Pilsners or Red Ales. So yeah, 1A, 1B for my answer.
All right. Cool. Guys, we're in the last stretch here, last 2 or 3 questions. Anything coming up at the brewery you'd like to share?
We're about to bring out some nachos, some pulled pork nachos, and some chicken nachos for delivery, or not delivery, for carryout. Otherwise, a lot of carryout. That's kind of what's coming up. I think the next Together We Can will be a week from Saturday. But otherwise, just we got 4-packs and crowlers to go, and that's kind of right now all we can really offer. Oh, we do have a few kegs. We started, since we started as a homebrew store, at one point we bought a literal truckload of Pinlock kegs. So that's one kind of unique things about our brewery is, when we became a professional brewery, we had the decision of, well, we're sitting on all these kegs. Do we want to go out and buy kegs or just use the ones that we have? Well, we refurbished and went ahead and used the ones we have. So if somebody wants to buy a 5-gallon Pinlock keg from us, they need to have a Pinlock connections. But I feel like I'm talking to the group that understands what those are.
Do you guys have conversion kits for those, Brad? Like if we're ball lock, do you have a conversion kit for that?
Yeah, we sell conversion kits in the homebrew supply store.
So we're not totally SOL if we want to get a keg and we're ball lock.
No, I believe you can. I'm trying to think because the beer is already in the keg, so you can't do the conversion kit where you change over the pen. I'm trying to think of if there's a conversion kit that allows you to hook up to a pin lock. I think it would just need. I think the probably the cheapest way would just be to get pin lock connectors or whatever.
Yeah,
As opposed to
and if you're using MFL, you could just swap them out, right?
yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Brian, anything your side of the brewery that you're pumped and like to share?
You know, it's funny you asked that question during the current situation that we're all kind of going through. So there's, maybe not as much going on in the brewery as we would have hoped for at the beginning of the year. We did recently, and I've done it in the past as a home brewer, but for the first time in the brewery, we're using on a beer that we just kegged today some cocoa powder in our mash, and we did a chocolate stout with that beer. So that will be coming out soon. And we basically did a split batch. So we put it in two different 1 barrel fermenters. One of them we kept traditional, and then the other one we're doing a cold brew edition to, which we had our friends at Hand and Glove prepare for us. So I would say that's probably the newest thing that we have coming out of the brewery, which should be available soon. Um, but I wish I could say that there was some more experimentation going on. I think upcoming, we've got a lot of our traditional recipes kind of coming back in, ready to be brewed again. So we're about ready to ramp up production on those, which are always fun to kind of get back into. So yeah, I think anything new right now is just getting our head out of this cloud that we are currently in. Just kind of looking forward to when the end is near, and getting kind of everything back to normal.
If you don't mind, since you mentioned it, that cocoa powder and the mash, can you talk about that for a second?
Yeah, yeah, sure. So we used one of our stout recipes we had done in the past, which we're only using three different malts. Maris Otter, I believe it was Munich Dark, and then chocolate malt on that one. And we got a really good chocolate profile off of that base recipe itself. And so I would say we brewed that probably almost a year ago. And so upcoming, we were kind of planning on getting a stout recipe together. Wanted to kind of do something in that field. So we kind of brought that back, tweaked it a little bit, added in some cocoa powder into our mash. Normally, we were doing in the past, right around 4 ounces of cocoa powder per like a 5 gallon batch as like a home brewer is kind of what I was used to. With this particular one, we kind of ramped that up. I think we're closer to about the 8 ounce per 5 gallons on this particular recipe. So significantly a lot more of that in the recipe. So pretty excited about how it's going to turn out. I think it tastes pretty good. So looking forward to getting it out there.
Cool. Is there anything that you guys would like to talk about that we haven't hit on?
I don't think I've got anything.
Haven't hit on? I don't know. Yeah. Well, I mean, what's everyone drinking? I don't even know what everyone's drinking right now or throughout the night. I had a spotted cow. I think that was one thing we didn't really. I think everyone needs to hold up their beers and show us what they're drinking on right now. There's a wind shift. There's a couple of wind shifts here. Cheeky mate. I think Alex had a cheeky mate earlier. Three halves. Nice. I see a lot of local ones. Good. Rye on rye on rye. You guys are doing good right now. Feeling good. Cool. Yeah. All right.
Cool.
This is like a crazy episode of the Brady Bunch right now. I feel like we're all just kind of like looking around.
Yeah, just wait until I hit unmute on them, and then you're gonna have a lot of fun, Brian.
I can't wait.
This is the last question before what I call releasing the hounds. And this is more for us on the editing side of it before Shockey puts it up on the YouTube. Is there anything in what we've talked about tonight that you guys would prefer didn't make it online? Like maybe some of your process or anything that you just wish you wouldn't go up online.
We don't have any real secrets in our brewing, and we kind of do tie it all back into the homebrew supply store. And I actually owe some people some recipes right now, but we kind of tell people, you know, not only are our recipes not a secret, but we will actually, you know, give you the recipe and give you the tips to brew it at home. You know, we're a homebrew supply store as well, so we try to tie the two in together. Does this group chat get thrown in there?
I can save the chat if you want it, Brad. I can send it to you personally.
No, I don't think that's a good record to keep.
Yeah, we'll probably burn that somewhere in virtual fire. Brian, anything that you'd prefer we didn't put in there?
No, not at all. I agree with Brad. We're open to talk to you guys about anything we're doing in the brewery or any of our recipes in particular. You know, if anybody wants to do a copy of it or just get ideas on how we did something so they can move forward with their recipe, then, you know, don't hesitate to reach out and ask us, or, you know, I would say come into the brewery, but that's probably not the best option right now considering. But yeah, just reach out, send us a message, social media, email, whatever. We'll be happy to answer any questions, give you any ingredients or recipes you guys would like.
Cool. Well, I'm going to stop recording.